When I first met my wife, she seemed to me like a true ray of sunshine in my life. We were the perfect couple, shared interests, laughter until we cried, and crazy dreams about the future. I cherished every moment spent with her. We often discussed how important it was to trust each other, especially when she started working at a large company that required frequent business trips. I always supported her, knowing that it was an important step for her career. One day, it was a cold winter morning. She was set to fly out for an important business meeting in another city. Over morning coffee, sitting at the table, she looked excited and full of energy. I sent her off to the airport with a smile on my face and a kiss, understanding that she wanted to achieve success. "I'll be just fine," she said confidently. Those words, carelessly spoken at that moment, now haunt me as a foreshadowing of anger. In the evening, as I sat on the couch waiting for her return, my phone unexpectedly rang. I glanced at the screen and froze in fear. It was the airline's number. Wrong associations began to swirl in my mind, and I felt a cold sweat cover my body. I picked up the phone, and the voice of the airline representative informed me about an incident that occurred on board the plane. His words struck me like a bolt of lightning. He explained that one of the passengers reported inappropriate behavior on the flight. My wife and an unknown man had been seen in the airplane restroom, and apparently the flight attendants were involved in the investigation. At that moment, I was in complete shock. How could this happen? She had never shown such tendencies, and I felt like I was living in a nightmare. Despite my internal chaos, I tried to gather myself and waited for her return. She came home with a tired but satisfied face, as if everything was normal. But when I asked her what had happened, I saw her lose confidence. She tried to justify herself, but her words seemed unconvincing. It was a one-time event. "I just couldn't resist the circumstances," she tried to explain, looking into my eyes. A few days later, I learned that the incident had left a negative impression on other passengers. They began to discuss her actions, and it turned out that the public outcry was beyond my expectations. My wife buried her head in the sand, like an ostrich, hoping everything would be forgotten. But the next day, the plane landed with her in disgrace. As she disembarked, people around her were whispering, pointing fingers, and laughing. It was humiliating for her. Moreover, soon after this incident, I started receiving calls from airline representatives. They called not only to complete formalities, but also to ensure that their reputation wasn't damaged. "We apologize for what happened, and we are ready to offer compensation for any inconvenience your wife may have caused," they would say. But compensation meant nothing to me. I felt my heartbeat quicken as I thought about what had happened. Every evening after that, when we sat in the kitchen, I tried to analyze everything that happened. She couldn't understand how she could make such a mistake. "It was something completely different from what you think. We need to figure everything out," she insisted, but each time I looked at her, all I saw was deceit. I couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal that had left a scar on my heart. As time passed and I returned to my job, driving along the endlessly stretching roads, thoughts of her continued to haunt me. One day, I stopped on the side of the road to have a cup of coffee and clear my head. In that moment, the outside world seemed distant, and I decided it was time to learn to let go. I remembered how she would laugh when I tried to make breakfast for her, only to fail miserably. How everything had become so strange and difficult. Then, one of her colleagues, who happened to be at the same cafe as me, suddenly approached me. I was surprised to recognize him. He was with her on that trip, and the incident led to a whirlwind of discussions among employees. He tried to keep the conversation casual, but finally couldn't help himself. "You heard about what happened, right?" he started, and I felt my patience with him diminish. Realizing that these words could only deepen my suffering, I asked him to stop talking about it. But he continued. "My wife also heard the conversation, and even her friends were discussing how she boasted about her adventure." Those words sounded like thunder on a clear day. I felt anger surge within me again. So weeks went by. I tried to return to a normal life, but every time I looked at her photo, where she smiled, I remembered that terrible moment, and I felt pain wash over me. She was attempting to return, repeating how much she needed me, how she realized her mistakes. But every time she tried to touch me, I pushed her away. One evening, I went back to that restaurant where we had often been together. I stared at the menu, trying to find comfort in memories, but all I discovered was emptiness. However, eventually, I found distraction when I noticed a local performer with a guitar. His music weaved a thread of hope through my heart. With each passing day, I began to learn to let go. I gathered my thoughts and decided not to remain in despair any longer. Recovery meant starting anew. I began exercising, being more active, and opening up to new acquaintances. Perhaps the path to healing lay in discovering new opportunities and people. After a while, just when I thought I had overcome everything, I received another call. I looked at the number. It was her name. I panicked and hung up. In that moment, I realized it was the end. I easily wove new relationships into my life, and immediately felt my heart start to beat anew. She kept trying to contact me, leaving messages, but I could no longer play by her rules. I knew it was time to do this a long time ago, but it wasn't easy. Eventually, one evening, she came to my workplace. I returned home, and my heart tightened with memories. She stood there, with her head down, and in her eyes was a mix of hope and remorse. We talked for quite a while. "I've realized my mistakes, and I know how deeply I went wrong, and I'm ready to do whatever it takes to make it right," she said. I saw her struggling, but my heart could no longer return. At one point, I told her, "I can't lift your shame, and I need to move on with my life." I didn't want to return to what was before. I understood it was time to cut loose the unnecessary baggage. We were together, and despite all our history, it was time to sever the ties. Months passed since our breakup, and I finally began to find peace. I continued on my path, as if I was someone stepping into a new world. Having gone through hell, I learned to appreciate every moment of life. I remembered that incident as a painful lesson that led to my transformation. I understood that, while we once shared good moments, it was not worth dragging everything into the light. Now, each new day became an opportunity for me. I left my fears and doubts behind. I learned not to be afraid of change, but to embrace it. I kept moving forward, and the new roads were filled with vibrant possibilities. Yes, she was a part of my story, but it was time to leave her in the past. I knew there were new flowers waiting for nourishment on the horizon. I looked forward with optimism, free from my past. My paths were open, and I was ready to trust again. Thank you for being with us. Do not forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel.